Okay, so this is I'm going to do the refactoring from the test, and I'm going to focus on the thing that um, I realized was a new thing that I asked you to do. Some of you had a little success with it. Some of you just kind of couldn't quite figure it out, which is fine because, like I say, it was a new thing. But I want to talk about how to actually move the variables along with the code so that we end up with not having this giant block of variables all in one function. And so the trick is basically to figure out which variables go with which code and then move them down into the functions that need them and out of the functions that don't need them. And so the very first thing we can do is we can, like in the editor, if we select a variable, it'll show us all the places it's used. And so we can see, just for instance, this horizon is only really used, as kind of makes sense, to draw the background of the sky and the ground. And so if we cut that code out, as you very well might have done, and made draw background or something, that's going to depend on horizon. And there's two ways you can handle it. I think a lot of you have gotten pretty good at recognizing that we need horizon. We can pass it in as an argument, which is fine. And in this case, maybe that's the reasonable thing to do. But just to demonstrate, let's show that now that I've moved that code, this variable is actually not used. We can see how it's light gray. So that means we can cut the variable as well and move it down here, reformat this, and then go back wherever we took that from, which is probably here, draw a background. And it doesn't take any arguments because the only variable that wasn't a global variable was horizon, which we just moved with the code. And so everything still works. Now, in this case, we can then do a further thing, which is promote that variable to be a parameter that we can pass an argument to. And then we can come back here, and the place we call it, rather than making a variable, we'll just use the value, right? Because the point of a variable is to give us a name that we can use to refer to a value. But if in this function, we're only using this value once, which is to control the background. So we just pass it in there. And then we can look at the function and see, oh, like that's being used as a horizon. So that should all still work. Okay, so that's great. But that was only 2 lines of code and 1 variable that we've gotten rid of. So the next thing we can do is we can say, well, obviously all the rest of this is somehow related to drawing the castle. And I'm going to actually take all of everything else. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move this, I'm going to close this off. I guess this is the easiest way to do it. I'm going to close that off and start a new draw castle and path, since that's everything else. And now the old closing brace of draw castle scene now closes this function. And we just need to add the call to draw castle and path. And this should still work because we know that none of that code depended on horizon. Okay, and so now draw castle scene is boiled down to like the smallest bit we can. And so now we have a question of, all right, we've got a bunch of variables in here. And we'd like to move some of them out of this function into a smaller function that draws a smaller part of this. And so one actually good way to start with this is to start at the bottom, because the top level variables like castle x is derived from the width of the drawing area and the width, but then lots of things depend on that, and the gate depends on that, and then the path depends on the gate. But if we look at these path variables, kind of makes sense. Like they're defined last, so they depend on some other things. And they're only used down here to draw the path, which makes sense because that's all that matters. So let's make a draw path. And if we, like I cut that code, now, the difference is that because I want to move these variables, I could just make path top x, path top y, all of these path variables arguments and pass them in, but then I'd have to keep these variables up here. Well, actually, you can see already path top x and path top y we don't even need. So those ones we can go ahead and move directly to here because they don't, they're not otherwise referenced. Now that does mean suddenly those depend on gate X and gate width and gate Y and gate height. So that suggests that, and also part of this is thinking about what things actually depend on. So the path really just depends on the location and the size of the gate. It's derived from that. So actually what we can do is pass in the information that should be enough to figure out where to draw the path. And so now gate X, gate Y, gate width, gate height, and the thing, and then path top X and path top Y are derived here. And so the only one that we're missing is path W, I think, which was the other path variable. And actually when we moved those other two variables, it went gray because it wasn't used other than to define those two. So, and it's defined in terms of the gate width. So really those three variables were only used for this line of code. So if we pass these values in, we can compute the path specific variables in that function. And so those variables are defined up here. And so now at the place where we call path, I'm just going to paste the same names and make sure I keep them in the right order: gate X, gate Y, gate width, gate height. And hopefully it all still works. Okay, so now we've gotten, it's not a huge savings, but we've moved three of the variables out of this pretty high level function down into the what will be one of the lowest level functions, because this doesn't call any other functions we're going to write. It just draws a rectangle. So it does a little bit of work to figure out like where everything should be. And away we go. All right, so that's good for now. Then I want to pick another thing to pull out, and I kind of want to again work from the bottom and look at, so and just sort of logically can like lump these things. So there's like the castle related things, and then there's a whole bunch of tower stuff. Now the one thing that we'll find is annoying is that for some reason we defined the size of the castle blocks in terms of the tower blocks, which is itself determined in terms of the size of the castle block. So that's going to be a little unfortunate, but I guess we'll live with that. We'll figure out how to deal with that. And then we have these gate values, which logically are used for drawing the gate, and then the flag stuff is for the flags on top of the towers. So let's take a look at where the gate is drawn. We just moved the path. Let's see if we can move the gate. And that basically starts here. We can test that by commenting that out, one line of that, and we'll see like, okay, there goes the circle, the top of the door, or the top of the gate. And so that's kind of where it starts, all this saddle brown stuff, and then the gold knobs, and then the midline. And then after this, I think these are like the flagpoles and stuff. So it's actually, this code is a little bit mixed up. So let's take this code. I'm going to put a call to draw a gate here, which we'll come back and fill in the arguments, just leave that XXX comments so I can find it later. And we're going to put the code here, draw a gate, format that, and same trick as before. We can look, okay, so knob Y and mid X are grayed out, so that means we can move them with the code that we just moved. They're going to depend on some other variables, but those are other variables we were going to depend on anyway. And then like the path, it makes sense that the gate depends on, right, the gate variables, gate X, gate Y, gate width, gate height, which is the same variables as draw path. Now that raises an issue, which is if we move these variables into, say, draw gate, then we won't have them anymore to pass into draw path. And so that makes me think, So one way to fix that, so I only define the variables in one place, is to introduce a new function. And it kind of makes sense in that the gate and the path kind of go together and they're related to each other, as we can see by the fact that they depend on the same arguments. And so and what I'm going to do instead of that call that I added to draw gate, I'm going to actually just go down here and it's called draw gate and path with, for the moment, these 4 arguments. So why don't I go ahead and copy that? Actually, let's not do that. So I'm going to actually take those out because the point is I want to move these variables. So I'm going to delete that for a second. And so right now draw gate and path doesn't take anything, but draw gate is definitely going to depend on those. And so now the question is there anything else that refers to those? And I think if we cut that, that's going to gray out gate height. And that means if we cut all 3 of those, that's going to gray out gate W. And so we can actually cut all of those, move them down here. And now we just need to figure out what are those variables derived from. So now we're looking at the variables that we need to pass in, because more than just the gate and the path depends on this castle width and castle X and castle Y. So another thing I've been doing, or that's a good idea, is to pass arguments in a consistent order. So I'm always going to do, whenever we pass an X and a Y and a width and a height, I'm going to pass them in that order, X, Y, width, height. Just so that way I don't have to remember which way did I do it in which function. It's always going to be the same order. So even though this one happens to be castle W first, it does depend on X and Y and height. So I'm going to do them in that order. And I think, so now I copy these parameters, these variable names, and paste them in here. And that will depend on these variables. So maybe I went pretty fast. Something almost worked. The path went away. What happened here? Draw gate and path. Gate X, gate Y, gate width, gate height. What happened? All right, it's a mystery. So it should have been this call to draw gate and path. X, Y, width and height. X, Y, width and height. Got the gate W, got the gate H. Gate X, gate Y. Oh, whoops. Castle Y is not defined, line 127. Oh, right. The gate is, there's this value, castle Y. Castle Y is the top Y coordinate of this, and castle height is the whole height. So castle Y plus castle, that's like this bottom line, which I think, didn't we have a variable? We had castle base, which is actually better. So let's pass that. Right, because in order to draw the gate and the path, we need to know where the bottom of the castle is, because that's like where the bottom of the gate is and where the top of the path is. So I'm going to pass that variable in, which means I need to add it here. And then draw gate depends on the gate dimensions, and this, like we just said, is really castle base. So if I pass that there, and that means when I draw the gate. And I think this is actually working the same way, where path top Y is the gate Y, which is kind of the top of this rectangle, plus the height, which is really the same place. It's that same line. And it actually makes more sense. We don't even need path top Y, because it's the same. It is the castle base. So we can, and in fact, this is even better because now we see these two parameters got grayed out, because to actually draw the path, we don't care. The gate Y is like the top of the rectangle part of the gate, and the gate height is also related to that, which the path logically doesn't depend on. So we can get rid of that gate Y and get, but instead pass, all we need is the X and the width and the base. And we take those out of our parameter list, so everything matches up. So now it's X, Y, and castle base. And now path top Y was used here as well. All right, and now we're back in business. So this is now even simpler. It depends on really just three things, which kind of makes sense. And yeah, so and it computes some values to use to, we could even inline them right there if we want, but it's fine. So we've moved the variables, and now we've moved the definition of all the gate related stuff is derived from the dimensions of the castle and the position of the castle. But that means we've gotten rid of those variables up here. So we have even less stuff. Right, and this is getting whittled down bit by bit. And so now our next goal is probably to all this tower drawing stuff, which is kind of hairy. And let's see what we can do with that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually note that, what do I want to do here? So this draw castle and path is drawing a bunch of stuff, and then it draws the gate and the path. That's fine. And then it draws the big wall, the light gray, big rectangle. Then it draws these two towers, which are basically drawn in the same way, with the only difference between obviously being where they are. This one's over here, and this on the left, and this one's on the right, and then the color of the flag that's on top of them. And so, and here we have, first we draw the two gray boxes, right? And if we comment this out, we'll see that's like the left box goes away, the little top of it is still there, and the other tower is still there. And then this loop draws the blocks, tower, and it's looping over tower blocks. So it's drawing the blocks for the leftmost tower. So I'm going to move that up. And then those are the dim gray blocks. And now we have the tower and the blocks on the right. And then the castle blocks are actually here as well. Let's move those up with the castle itself. Where do we draw the castle here? We can even put in some comments. Let's call this castle wall. All right, and then this is drawing the left tower. This is drawing the right tower, and then this line, the thing that starts with the left tower X, is drawing the flagpole for the left tower. So let's move that up here with the left tower. And then here's the red flag, which is also the flag on the left tower. And then we can see we have the same thing for the flagpole and the flag for the right tower. So basically we've reorganized the code. The order in this case doesn't matter because nothing overlaps. So like this is draw the left tower, and this is draw the right tower. And we can tell just by looking at the image that those are drawn in basically the same way. It's like a rectangle, they're the same size, the blocks are the same size, the flagpoles are the same size. Like I said, just the position and the color of the flag differs. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy one of these. I'm going to actually copy it, and just for the moment, actually I'm going to cut it. I'll go ahead and But I'm gonna jump ahead. I'm gonna assume that I'm gonna make a function called draw tower. Because I'm assuming I'm going to be able to make this function capable of drawing either of the towers. So for the moment, I'm just going to draw the left tower. And now we have a similar, and then let's do, but I'm going to comment this one out so we can see which variables are still used. So right now, both the towers will go away because I'm not passing. But now we see a bunch of these variables that are related to the tower are grayed out, which makes sense because if we've moved all the code related to drawing the tower, this one isn't grayed out. Or this is that thing where the castle block also depends on the tower block, which is a little bit annoying. And it depends on the tower width and the number of tower blocks. So that's annoying. And we might not be able to move all of these. Okay, so let's see which ones are actually grayed out. And maybe we'll go carefully. Okay, so tower gap and tower block H. And, so these four, we don't have any dependency on, so we can move those into draw tower. Left tower and right tower, actually. Those are not specific to draw, they are specific to drawing a particular tower. So I'm going to put those here. And they depend on the tower width, tower height. Okay. And then these flagpoles also are related to, where is flag W referenced? Oh, and it's referenced there. So if we comment that out, flag H gets grayed out, and comment that out, these two get grayed out. So we can see that which makes, again, sense. The flagpole, flag related stuff is really part of drawing the tower. And so we can move those in here. Okay, and so the thing that we don't define here, because it's also used to draw the castle wall, is tower block W. That's this. What was the other one? Probably, tower height is no longer used here, so we can move that down. I'm going to define it before. All right. And now there's a bunch of stuff. The tower depends on a bunch of the castle dimensions. We can see castle H, castle base. And since let's see, what else? And then left tower X is going to be the argument. So we'll put that in here, though we'll rename it in a sec because it's not always going to be the left tower. But left tower X, castle H, castle base. Feels like we must know. The left tower X is derived from the castle X. So I'm not sure I've got everything here. So now we can let JavaScript tell us. So we're going to pass in left tower X and castle base. And maybe this will work. No, it did not. Tower W is not defined. All right, that was one of the other variables we had to leave behind, which of course makes sense. So tower W, we'll put that before. Oh, actually, we've got several arguments that I've already added here. So let's copy all of these. Make sure all right, tower blocks, that makes sense too. Add that here. All right, and now we get what we expect, which is we drew the left tower, and this function isn't actually specific to the left tower. So let's rename this, we'll just call it X. What happened here? Slight, let's not call it. I'm going to undo that. Oops, undo that. The problem here is that I made another variable X, and so I can't use the same name. So we'll rename this. Actually, just call it Tower X for the moment. Okay, so that should still work. Great. And we can almost just replace all this commented out code with another call, and instead of positioning it, we'll do the right tower X. But then we'll discover, we have a red flag and another red flag because this code uses blue. And so that suggests we need to pass along the difference as another argument. And that means we got to do something with it. So we'll pass that flag color, which we added but isn't used, but then we go find the place that's red and replace it. And now we get back to our original thing, and we can delete all this code that was replaced by this call to draw a tower twice. All right, and now the only thing that's annoying is these are so long. It'd be nice if we made these names a little bit shorter or something so that this could fit on a line. We'll get there eventually, I think. Another thing to note is that now the left tower X is actually only used in one place. So I while it's nice to use names, and sometimes it's nice to give a thing a name just so you know what it is, sometimes it's also nice to just not have extra variables that you have to worry about, because now we know this is only used in one place. Now, if I was using this expression a bunch of times, then I might keep the variable. But that should work. So now there's two less variables because draw a tower takes its tower X, and there's just two different X's. The one that's like the castle wall minus the width of the tower, and the castle wall plus the width of the castle. Okay. And so that's fine. And now we've further whittled down tower blocks. Like, we do have this little bit of unfortunate, let's at least put these together. Because of this kind of cyclical dependency where the castle block width depends on the tower block width, which depends on the number of tower blocks and the tower width. We can't completely move these. We could move that out to a function that computes it or something, but let's not do that yet. Okay, so now we've got these two calls, and I'm going to go ahead just for grins and make this is slightly silly. I don't even know if that's really worthwhile, but what was the goal here? So we're gonna take all but the first argument, and we don't need the flag color. So let's draw towers. And then draw towers is also going to need castle X and castle width. So I'm going to do my thing, castle X. We don't actually need castle Y, so we'll skip it. Castle width, but otherwise I'm putting the same order, so X, width, and height. And now up here, this was maybe premature. Let's see. Okay, still works. Anyway, it's just later this will be better when we can get these names shorten down a little bit. Okay, but it's getting a little bit better in the sense that now we can extract draw castle wall, and that will gray out yet more things. So we'll put that here because we draw the castle wall before we draw the towers, and that lets us move at least these two. Maybe that's it for the moment, but that's not nothing. So let's move those. Or maybe it is more than that. Okay, so the castle, and then the extra gap comes from that. And the castle block width. Now this is one where we could move this, but then we would have to pass the tower block width into draw castle wall. And that seems a little funny. So I'm going to go ahead and make that a parameter to this function. And then castle block width. And since that was gray before, oops, that was the only use of that variable, so we, sorry, can't get rid of it. Right, so we need that because, oh, I'm sorry, what I was trying to say is we don't need the variable anymore, we just need the value. And these, all right, what else is gone? Castle blocks isn't referenced other than to draw the castle wall, so we'll move that in here. And so now the things that we set up are the base, the height and the width, and the X and the Y, which have to be declared in that order because they're, the X and the Y are determined from the width and the height. And I can further clean this up by promoting these to be parameters. So if I say castle, let's move the castle W, and we'll move all three of them. Castle W, castle height, and castle base. And now I just take these values and pass them in. So this is a little bit a matter of taste of like which things you're going to like sort of make inherent in the function and which ones you're going to make parameters. I'm kind of going by if these are the only places those are used, it makes as much sense to like move them up a level. And everything else is derived from those. So I think, nope, what did I break? Castle W is not defined. Oh, line 41. Sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. I didn't. All right, so now to draw the castle wall, we can even just logic it out. So it's going to need to know castle X and needs to know where the castle Y is. That's like defines those. That's really is the, those are the coordinates of the wall. We need to know how big it is. We need to know how tall it is. And probably castle base is in here somewhere. Let's see. Whoops. Oh, and then we got to actually pass all those things. So sometimes you don't get an error, and that's because as long as all these variables like exist, JavaScript is fine. It'll just assign them undefined values if you don't pass enough arguments. So we didn't get an error, but we didn't get anything because the undefined turns into 0. And so we got like a width and height of 0 or something. Okay, and then castle block W was actually the one that we were passing. All right, now we're back in business. Take that comment out. All right. And that seems pretty fine. All right, so there's this relation between the wall and the towers which means we have to have some of these variables defined and passed around in a slightly annoying way. Okay, so that at least is, I'm not crazy about these lines that have to get wrapped because all these variable names are so long, but that basically did it. So we have our draw castle scene. We have draw castle and path, which kind of makes sense in that it makes sense to have one function that draws the castle and the path, because it doesn't really make sense to draw the path if there's no castle. I mean, we can like comment out the bit that draws the castle and that draws the towers, which is like the rest of it. I guess, and then the gate and path go together. All right, there's different ways we could unfactor this. I'm gonna go with that though. Okay. Yeah, we might want to, now that we're here, draw gate and path. Right, those go together because they depend on the same variables. Yeah, so we could draw castle and path. I guess we could, yeah. It'd be kind of nice to be able to just, I guess if we wanted to get rid of the path, we would just take it out of draw gate and path, which would make that, yeah, there's actually, those are pretty actually tied because of the way I drew this with the circle. We actually need the path to cover up the little bottom of the circle that sticks out here. So we'll just call that good enough. Okay, so now we've got draw path, draw gate. Those are like the primitive things. Draw gate and path combines them because they share these variables that we want to define in one place and then pass in. And then the one last thing that we can do here is these blocks. Actually, there's a couple more things we can do here. So the tower itself is kind of complicated. So let's start with the flag, right? This line and the rectangle for the flag, that is in fact drawing the flag. So let's take all that. And now it's going to depend on a bunch of stuff. And then some of the stuff it's going to depend on is going to be, as makes sense, like the flag variables belong in the function that draws the flag. So we get to move them down. And now drawing the flag is a little bit dependent on the exact coordinates of the tower stuff. So we have tower X, tower Y, tower width, and tower height, and tower block W. This is that kind of annoying variable that we have to keep passing around everywhere. And then obviously, drawing the flag depends on the flag color. Okay, and so now if we take that out, now we can say draw flag. What did I do? Tower block. Oh, also needs to know that. Tower. Okay, so this one I don't love how many arguments it takes, but at least we got to move these 4 variables down here. And now we can also start Well, I was going to rename these X and Y, but it's not really the X and Y of the flag, so I don't. Maybe it's better to keep the name meaningful. So we know that's the X value of the tower, which is like this point, and then we use that to figure out where does the flagpole line go. Though maybe that points us towards a slightly different way to handle this, which is the only reason we need the tower W and the tower X is because that's actually how we compute the X value of the flagpole. So here's a trick. Let's add another argument here. And then let's go up to where we call draw flag and put in that expression that uses those two variables as a new argument. And in theory, we can now, everywhere we have that complicated expression, replace it with X, which makes a lot of sense. Right? That is the actual X of the flagpole, really, which is also the X where we draw like the position of the flag. And this should still work even though these two aren't used anymore. But that means we can take them out here. And that kind of makes sense because drawing the flag doesn't actually depend on, once we know the X of the flagpole itself, we don't care about the tower's X or the tower's width. And maybe let's see if we can do a similar maneuver. This one's a little more complicated. Because of the way the extra flagpole, the little top that sticks up. So that's a little more annoying. We're using the tower Y plus, or like minus the block height to get that, but then the top of the, like we could readjust some math here. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to leave that well enough alone. Let's see. And then the flag width is related to the block width. That's used to figure out where the top of the block is. Flag color obviously is dependent. Okay, but at least this line now fits on a single line, as does this one. Also, we can make a variable. We'll just call this kind of our, let's just call that Y. It's one Y, which means we can come over here. I think that should be the same. Yep. And that probably, now that fits on a line. So things are starting to get a little better. All right. So now we got the draw flag and here, now we can shorten these names, draw tower. So this is actually the X of the thing we're drawing. So it makes sense to just call it, what happened? X and tower W can just be W. Does that help? A little bit. That one got shorter. Oh, tower Y. We can rename that to Y. Rename that to H. Rename that to block H. Basically just getting rid of the tower prefix to make all these things shorter. Rename that to blocks. All right, but we leave the castle prefix on castle H and castle base because those are not the tower thing. Those are the castle things. All right, and so now these lines are a lot shorter, and we can extract this thing, which draws oops, I think maybe I took too much. So there's the rectangle that actually draws the tower, and then there's this bit, which draw tower blocks. And it's going to depend on some stuff, X, Y, block width, block height, blocks, and gap. Oh, but gap is now grayed out because that's just a part of drawing the blocks. It's computed from these other values. And then here we have this, actually the same problem. Oh, we had that before. Oh, maybe I didn't run it. Okay. Anyway, I have this problem where if this variable's name is X, and we can't use X here, but this is like the block X. So we'll just call that BX. Let's see. Is this X, Y, block, W, block, H, blocks. Nope, W is not defined. At line 94. Oh, sorry, we need to know. Yes, we need to know the width of the tower in order to draw the blocks. All right, now we're back in business there. And part of the point of that, let's see, block 8, H, that seems fine, is there's another place we draw blocks, which is the castle blocks. And so I'm going to do a slightly different thing here. I'm going to cut this. I'm going to come down and put it here because I'm pretty sure that the way we draw the blocks for the castle and the tower blocks is going to be very similar. Obviously, the variables that we're passing in are different, but the way the drawing happens is going to be very similar. And, okay, so up here where we need to pass in these values, but some of them are like the gap. We can move down here because it's not used otherwise. And that actually means all the rest of this can move down here. Oh, wait, is that what I want? Actually, don't want to do that. I'm going to leave that there for a sec. Castle blocks, I will move. No. Because the point is I'm trying to actually get this to be a lot like the other one. So what do we need here? Makes sense that we need the X and the Y and the width. Castle gap. Do we need the castle width? And so we're going to use castle X. Do we need castle Y? Yes. Makes sense. We need castle W. And then castle block H. And then castle blocks, which makes sense because those are kind of what you need to know. All right, what we don't, extra gap though, we can compute down here. It is derived from, actually, we need it before the gap. All right. Is this going to work? Indeed it does. Now, the thing to note is if after we rename these, and this time this variable was bx, so I can safely rename that, rename this to y, rename this to w, I'm just renaming all these things to take off the prefix like I did before with the tower version. And really, I'm just doing that to show that now this takes exactly the same arguments as this one. The only difference, and then if we rename castle gap to gap, there's a gap that's computed in a slightly different way, and then a loop over the blocks, and then the x is computed using the extra gap, but otherwise the same, and then we draw the same thing. So really the difference between these two functions is this one has this extra gap that gets computed. So what if we actually made that even though I just moved it in, I'm going to now promote it back to being a parameter, and up here where we call draw castle blocks, I'm going to add just the value. And that should still work fine. Nope. Oh, block W. Oh, that's the perils of renaming castle block W. All right. But what that means is that if this extra gap was 0, then this expression and this expression would be the same because subtracting 0 doesn't change anything and adding 0 doesn't change anything. So that means that the place we call draw tower blocks, we can actually call draw castle blocks with all the same arguments as before and an extra gap of 0, and everything still works, which means we don't need draw tower blocks anymore, and we can rename this draw blocks. And so now we've further deduplicated by making this one function that's a little bit more flexible, or flexible enough to encompass the more complicated case. It was easy enough to pass 0 here. And now I think we've really basically done kind of what I wanted to do. XW, tower W, draw towers. And I guess we could this is now, since this is all about drawing the castle wall, it seems fair to rename these without the prefix. Oops. Which makes that fit on a line. So this is really about having small functions. The smaller your function, the shorter your variable names can be because they only have to have a meaning within that function. And I think we could do about the same thing. It's a little draw towers because this is not the x of the tower, but it's the x of the castle. It's kind of nice to have the prefix on that, though I don't love the way these wrap. But draw castle and path, could we get away with renaming those? Probably so. I'll just leave it like that. Okay, but so now we did a bunch of small functions. So we got this like 4-line function. This one's would be a half dozen, 10 lines if this fit on a line. Couple lines, draw the castle walls, straightforward. It draws, and it's not doing nothing. It draws a rectangle and it draws the block. So it's a little more complicated than just drawing one rectangle. Draw the towers is really just there to draw the 2 towers. And in a better world, we could detangle the castle block size from the tower block size. And then we could just move these variables into here. So this would take fewer arguments, or maybe all the way down into draw tower. That would be better. And then draw blocks we use in 3 different places, one for each tower and one for the castle. Draw the flag, draws the line in the flag, contains just, the variables that are only used for that are moved down there. Gate and path, draw the gate, draw the path, and there's your whole scene. So I'm going to call that good enough. This video is, as always, probably too long, but if you stuck with it, you learned a bunch of stuff about how to refactor functions and move variables where they belong. All right, so hopefully you got something out of it, and I'll see you in the next one.